I'm Ted Wyman here with another edition of Jet Setting playoff version. And we have just witnessed game one of the Stanley Cup playoffs round two between the Winnipeg Jets and the Montreal Canadiens. And it was an extremely eventful game. The Canadiens play fantastic and come away with a 5-3 win. But the game marred by a very nasty hit by Mark Scheifele of the Winnipeg Jets, the Jets' leading scorer, on Jake Evans of the Montreal Canadiens, who ended up being carried away on a stretcher. Extremely disturbing scene at the end of the game, and one that has the hockey world talking. I'm joined today by Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette to get the perspective from out east. And Stu, how do you put into words what you saw last night?
Well, to me, it was a definition of intent to injure. I don't think Scheifele had any interest in stopping Jake Evans from scoring. I think he started from deep in his own end. I watched the video. I counted at least 15 strides he took to get up to full speed. And it was a headshot. And it was a deliberate headshot. It was intent to injure. I don't think there's any room for that in hockey. Scheifele was obviously frustrated. He showed that at earlier points in the game and decided to take out his frustration on Jake Evans' head. Thankfully, it looks like Jake Evans is going to be okay, at least as okay as he can be. I imagine I would have to think it's a severe concussion. He was out cold before he hit the ice, and then he smashed his head on the ice. I'm just so thankful that his helmet stayed on. But it was a brutal, vicious hit by a guy who was upset, angry, and decided to take it out on Jake Evans. And it's going to be interesting to see what the NHL Department of Player Safety does here. It's only going to be a hearing, so it's probably not going to be a lengthy suspension, which is sad, but doesn't surprise me, because I think part of the NHL wants to keep these hits in the game, and part of the NHL wants the mayhem that's going to result when Scheifele comes back into the lineup. Joel Edmondson said after last night's game, if he's back in the series, we're going to make his life miserable. So I think back to what happened with Wilson in Washington when the NHL only gave him a $5,000 fine after slamming Panarin's head to the ice. The next game, there was a line brawl. And it got ugly, but I think the NHL likes that. And I think the NHL is probably hoping, if they don't suspend Scheifele for the rest of the series, they're probably hoping that happens. And that, to me, that's sad.
Well, as you mentioned, the Department of Player Safety has issued a tweet that Mark Scheifele will have a hearing on Thursday. We don't know the results of that yet, but it is, I believe, a phone hearing. And if that's the case, then that would be a maximum of 5 games. Scheifele is not a repeat offender. He's not been suspended before. Not really known for this kind of thing. It really, in my opinion, was out of character for him, having covered him for his entire career. But, that didn't make it any less nasty, less dangerous. It was really kind of a sickening sight watching from the press box when that happened. And I think the only solace a lot of people took out of it from the Winnipeg side was the actions of Nikolai Ehlers, who really was trying to protect Jake Evans lying on the ground as all the players were fighting around him. And the Canadiens were understandably mad, and the Jets have to defend themselves in that situation. And Nikolai Ehlers really took it on himself to do something there. And the only reason I want to bring that up is that Dom Ducharme kind of indicated that he felt like there wasn't the empathy from the Winnipeg side that the Canadiens had showed when John Tavares was hurt. But I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but what Nikolai Ehlers did certainly showed that at least somebody cared what was going on.
I think everybody was in a bit of a state of shock when it happened, probably including the players on the ice. I mean, I honestly thought Jake Evans would have been dead the way he was lying on the ice. Like it was frightening. No, I'm not in Winnipeg. I was watching the game on TV here in Montreal, and my wife was in tears after. She couldn't watch the replays. It was just a violent, vicious hit. And as you mentioned, this thing, first-time offender, is that old school sort of NHL. So, if I go out on the street and I attack my neighbor and slam his head into the driveway, and I go in front of a judge, he's going to say, "Oh, we haven't done that before, so don't worry about it. We'll fine you $1,000." I don't understand how the justice system works in the NHL. It's an old school mentality run by a bunch of old guys and headed by a guy who used to be a goon. I mean, George Parros was paid millions of dollars to punch people in the face. That's the only reason he was in the NHL. It wasn't because of his hockey playing skills. And he's the guy running NHL player safety. And I still think, I think the NHL, I grew up in an era of, rock'em sock'em hockey, loved hockey fights, loved watching hockey fights. Remember the John Ferguson, the Chris Nylands, all the fighters with the Canadiens. But as time evolves, I like to think I've evolved. When you see the seriousness of what happens to guys after concussions with CTE and everything else, I mean, I understand why fights will remain in hockey. It's a game where guys get upset, but the staged fights and the hits like this, the intent to injure, I don't think it's part of hockey. I think Gary Bettman and the NHL think it is, and I think they want it to remain part of hockey. I think there's a lot of fans who like it. I mean, look at the reaction on social media. There's a lot of people blaming Jake Evans, saying, "Oh, it was a great hit. He had his head down. The kid deserved it." I'm like, really? So because you're making a hockey play, trying to put the puck in the net, looking at the puck gives the guy the right to hit you. It doesn't give him the right to skate the full length of the ice, leave his feet, drill you in the head, and knock you unconscious. But again, I think the NHL still wants to sell that old school rock'em sock'em hockey. If Scheifele gets back in, I'm sure they're going to love it if there's a big brawl, because they think that's going to bring more eyeballs to watching the game. Maybe it will. Are people watching it because they like it? Or people watching it like you sort of watch a car crash? But I just think it makes the NHL. There's a reason why in the States, the NHL and so many people, it isn't taken seriously. It's like WWE on skates. And I think the NHL encourages that. And if it's not a lengthy suspension for Mark Scheifele, that's going to be another example.
Yeah, and we saw when Tom Wilson wasn't suspended in one of his most recent instances, there was a line brawl right off the bat at the beginning of the next game. And, what are you doing there? You've just, you're looking at a situation where a player may have suffered a head injury, and then you're going to have players beat each other in the head with their fists to make up for it. So that just doesn't make a lot of sense. But
does the NHL want to see Scheifele taken off the ice on a stretcher after he gets beat up by somebody on the Canadiens when he comes back to the lineup? Maybe they do. I mean, I shake my head sometimes at the mentality, the old school, old boy sort of mentality that seems to prevail in the NHL.
There was a hockey game as well last night, Stu, and it really did go well for the Montreal Canadiens. I thought they played kind of exactly the way they wanted to play. And Paul Maurice said before the series that whichever team was truer to itself, whichever team really executed its game plan, was going to be the one that won. And I thought the Canadiens absolutely imposed their will in game one against the Jets. The Jets just didn't. The Jets had to chase that game the whole way because Montreal came in and carried forward the momentum that they had from game 7 against Toronto, and Winnipeg definitely couldn't match that intensity because they'd been off for a long time. I'm not trying to make that excuse, but I do think that a lot of people think that's exactly what happened. How did you see it?
Yeah, I don't think it's an excuse. If you look back in the history of NHL playoffs, teams that have had a long layoff between series don't do very well. Corey Perry spoke about it after the morning skate on Wednesday, saying that they were just still in their same routine. They flew from Toronto to Winnipeg after the game 7, had a sort of day of rest, a team meeting, a morning skate the next day, and right back at it. Whereas the Jets were sitting around for 8 days without a game. Practices can't obviously get up to the intensity of a playoff game, and the Canadiens knew that, and they knew they had to jump on the Jets early, and they did. And they got up 2-0 early in the game, and the Jets weren't able to fight back. But with the Canadiens, I picked the Leafs to win the first round series in 5 games, and I came within a Nick Suzuki overtime goal of being right on that. The Canadiens scored 4 goals in the first 4 games against Toronto. They have 5 goals in the first game against Winnipeg. But those 2 overtime wins, back to back, game 5 and 6, I wrote a column. It brought back memories of 1993 for me, when the Habs won the Cup and they won 10 straight overtime games. And I think there's just an energy and an enthusiasm and a momentum that a team gains, never mind from 1 overtime win, but 2 overtime wins, and both of them in elimination games. And since then, the Habs have looked like a different team. Game 7 against Toronto was similar to game 1 against Winnipeg. Dominic Ducharme, their head coach, talks about the system he wants to play. He emphasizes puck support all over the ice. He wants guys to work as a group of 5 all over the ice, trying to create 2-on-1s as much as possible. And game 7 against Toronto was a textbook. Like, I asked Ducharme after game 7, in the future, when people ask you about how your system and how it works, are you just going to show them a video of game 7 against the Leafs? And we saw that video again, game 1 against the Jets. A big team, veteran team, a lot of veterans with experience on the Canadiens, and they just play a hard game. They puck support all over the ice. They help each other out. Carey Price is, as I call him, playoff Price. It's two Carey Prices now. There's one we see in the regular season who's so inconsistent that he got his goalie coach fired in the middle of a game this season. to the one we see now in the playoffs, who is just, he's Carey Price. I mean, he's been unbelievable against Toronto. He's unbelievable against Winnipeg in game one. That gives the Canadiens confidence. The two overtime wins have given them confidence, and they've just been a different team. And as I said, I picked the Leafs to win in 5 in the first round series, but I picked the Habs to win in 6 in this series because I think the momentum they have, the way they're playing Ducharme's system, and with Carey Price in goal, they're going to be hard to beat.
Well, it is interesting, Stu, because the Jets did win their last 3 games in overtime coming into this as well, but you can't really carry that over 8 days later. And, you do have to look at it being a bit of an unfortunate circumstance for Winnipeg because the schedule was set up in such a strange way that Toronto and Montreal hadn't even played game 4 yet by the time Winnipeg had already swept Edmonton. So I can't imagine there being a much longer layoff in the Stanley Cup playoffs than the Jets just went through. And you have to feel a bit bad for that organization that did go that way. But that being said, we saw in 2018 Winnipeg against Vegas, Winnipeg coming off a 7-game win over Nashville, comes in and absolutely blows the doors off of Vegas in game 1. Vegas had been sitting for a while. And then interestingly, though, the Jets got a lot more tired as the series went on. And that's what I would be watching for. And that's even a little bit what I predicted coming in, was that Montreal would be gangbusters in game 1 and Winnipeg might be able to slowly take over as it went along. I don't know if I think that anymore when Paul Stastny, it's unknown whether he's going to be able to play in this series after he suffered an injury of some sort. Dylan DeMello gets hurt early in the game yesterday, very dependable defenseman, and his status is unknown. And I mean, Mark Scheifele, I think everyone believes is going to be suspended. We just don't know for how long or if he'll even get back into this series. So a lot has changed for Winnipeg. They were chasing game 1. Now they're chasing the whole series, and it's not going to be easy to come back in it.
No, the thing, though, to watch with the Canadiens is that they've more or less been going with 4 defense. Kulak and Gustafsson last night didn't play a lot. Gustafsson didn't play much after he had that brutal giveaway on the power play that resulted in the Jets' first goal. In the game 6 overtime against Toronto, the Habs were outshot 13-2 in overtime. They went with 4 defense the entire overtime, and those guys were just gassed. I mean, Shea Weber played almost 40 minutes in that game. He's 35 years old. And I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see as this series moves on, how much of a toll that takes on the Canadiens' defense. Last night, with the forwards, Ducharme really had the ice time spread evenly. That fourth line with Stahl, with Perry and Armia have played really well, so he hasn't hesitated to roll the 4 lines. So up front, I think the Canadiens are in a good position as far as not being too tired. But on the back end, when you got Weber, Sherratt, Petrie, and Edmondson, those guys are logging a lot of minutes. They're not young guys, and that could take a toll as this series goes on. It's going to be interesting to see for game 2. Alexander Romanov, the Canadiens rookie defenseman, has been a healthy scratch since the start of the playoffs. A lot of Canadiens fans and myself also shaking our heads a little bit about that, especially with Gustafsson, when they seem to be afraid to put him on the ice unless it's a power play. There aren't a lot of power plays in the playoffs, so it'll be interesting to see if Romanov gets into game 2 in Winnipeg. But that's, I think, the thing to watch as this series moves forward, is how the Canadiens defense holds up, especially the top 4 guys with the amount of minutes that they've been logging.
Well, we will see what happens, Stu. We will see what happens with the Mark Scheifele suspension that we expect to hear about. We will see if the Jets can regroup for game 2 Friday night in Winnipeg. Stu, thank you so much for joining me today with perspective from Montreal. And we will be back with more analysis as the series goes along. For Post Media, he's Stu Cowan in Montreal. I'm Ted Wyman. You've been watching Jet Setting.